Well, welcome everybody. Welcome everybody here in New York and also across the various offices. We've got Mountain View and a bunch of other Google offices. To a pretty exciting panel with an illustrious bunch of people. I think we're going to learn a lot about education in the US and elsewhere. I'm Craig Nevill-Manning. I'm an engineering director here in Google New York. And I wanted to begin by introducing the folks we have here. First, I want to introduce Ted Mitchell. If you could raise your hand, this is Ted. And Ted is the president and CEO of the NewSchools venture funds. We're going to hear a lot more about this, and you'll have a chance to ask some questions about this as we go through. He also serves as the president of the California School of Education, State Board of Education, I'm sorry. And prior to taking the helm at NewSchools in 2005, he served as the president of Occidental College in Los Angeles. He also serves on the Advisory Council for Stanford University's initiative on improving K-12 education and the advisory board of the American Federation of Teachers Innovation Fund. Ted Mitchell is the national leader in the effort to provide high-quality education for all students. I've got to get to the end of the sentence, I'm sorry, you'll bear with me. Long been active in educational reform initiatives throughout California and Los Angeles. So welcome, Ted. Thank you. I'd like to also welcome Richard Barth, Richard there in the middle. So Richard was made president and CEO of the KIPP Foundation in December 2006. So over the past 5 years, he's overseen the doubling of the network from 45 to 99 schools. Dramatically expand. Are we at 100 yet, or not quite? We have to have a big.
You can say 100.
Well, I can say 100. 45 to 100 schools. Dramatically expanded KIPP's leadership development programs, advocated for high-performing charter schools on Capitol Hill, and he came to KIPP from Edison Schools, where he was the president of district partnerships and managed school partnerships serving 40,000 students. Prior to joining Edison, Richard was one of the founding staff members of Teach for America. He currently sits on the board of directors of the Broad Center for the Management of School Systems and Be the Change Incorporated, and is president of the KIPP Foundation Board of Directors. So welcome, Richard. Many of you will be aware of and recognize Mr. Geoffrey Canada. Is that? Yeah. I should double check whether anybody's a doctor here. It's on. No, okay. I haven't put my foot in it yet. On his 20 plus years with Harlem Children's Zone, Geoffrey Canada has become nationally recognized for his pioneering work helping children and families in Harlem, and as a passionate advocate for education reform. Since 1990, Mr. Canada has been the president and chief executive officer for Harlem Children's Zone, which the New York Times Magazine called one of the most ambitious social experiments of our time. The work of Mr. Canada and Harlem Children's Zone has become a national role model and has been the subject of many profiles in the media, and most recently in the documentary Waiting for Superman. So now we're going to move into a panel discussion. Yes, thank you, welcome. A panel discussion. I'd first like to start off by giving each of these illustrious people a chance to talk about their organization briefly, what they think their key innovation is and what the work they're doing, and how they're challenging traditional roles in education. So, Mr. Canada, can we start with you?
Sure. I think what we're trying to do at the Harlem Children's Zone is really figure out a way to end generational poverty. Harlem is a community that was failing huge numbers of children when I was a child. So you fast forward 55 years, I'm 58, and you still see failure at the same rates. And it's not just Harlem, it could be Bedford-Stuyvesant, it could be central Los Angeles, it could be parts of Detroit, South Baltimore. There are some places that failure has been going on for huge numbers of kids so long that it's become the standard. It's actually now become the norm. And we wanted to create a way of working with children starting from birth straight through to when kids get into college and graduate from college, and figure out all the other supports that young people need, that we could actually change a community and change the outcomes for children in that community. And education is a key variable in all of this. And so we have our own charter schools, but we also work with the public schools inside our zone. We're in a 97 block area. There are 11,000 children who are in that area. And given time, we're working with about 8,500 of those children. We've created these pipelines that we start with something called baby college and stay with these kids. And we're just going to stay with them until we get them in college and we get them to graduate from college. And we think that's the way you're going to really sort of end the cycles of poverty. When those kids come back with college degrees, you don't have to worry about them and you don't have to worry about their children, that they're going to probably end up being able to be competitive. And so that's what it is that we're trying to do.
Fantastic. Mr. Barth.
KIPP, we're now a national network of public charter schools, 99 schools nationwide. 55 of our 99 schools are middle schools. That's what we're most known for historically. But over the last 5 years, we've grown dramatically into a K-12 system of schools. We have 24 elementary schools and 15 high schools. Even as we've grown from 2 to 99 schools over the past decade, the focus has been on making sure we serve the kids who need us the most, and we're preparing them for success in life. Today, we have over 27,000 children who wake up every day, come to our schools by 7:30 in the morning, and 95% of our kids are African American or Latino, 84% are eligible for free and reduced lunch. And with that being the demographics of the students we serve, over the last decade, 87% of our 8th graders, emphasize 8th graders, not high school seniors, have matriculated to college. I would say, you know, the innovation here, if you want to know truly, is I'd love to make it sound much sexier, particularly in this crowd, than it is. But the innovation, I would say, has been relentless, absolutely relentless focus on executing day in and day out on behalf of our kids. Before KIPP was a network of 99 schools, before we opened our first high school, before we opened our first elementary school, before even the two founders, Mike Feinberg and Dave Levin, conceived of a middle school that would serve kids from 5th through 8th grade, KIPP was just a promise to 48 KIPPsters in Houston, Texas, the original 48 in 1994. And the promise was, if you're willing to come to us every day at 7:30 and stay with us till 5, and if you're willing to spend a bunch of Saturdays of your life with us, and if you're willing to do the homework we're going to ask you to do, if you're willing to make those commitments, we're going to meet you halfway. And the promise is, if you do this, we're going to help you climb the mountain to and through college. And so I emphasize to people, because the innovation was not a middle school, really. It wasn't a high school or an elementary school. The innovation was making a promise other people, certainly at the time, thought was crazy, which is, this is what our mission is for you. We are hopefully inspiring you to sign up for it. And over the last 10 years, we've continued to peel the onion to figure out what it will take to deliver on that promise. But the innovation was the promise and the just unbelievable relentless execution day in and day out, working with kids who face tremendous challenges.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell.
So it's great to be here, first of all, and great to be wherever all the rest of you are. And looking forward to hearing from you. So NewSchools Venture Fund supports these guys and gals and people like them. Our role is to find, fund, and support early stage education entrepreneurs who are proving every day that you can transform educational outcomes for poor kids of color. And by extension, if you can transform education for kids against whom the deck is stacked, think of what you can do for people for whom the deck isn't stacked. So we find, fund, and support early stage education ventures across the US. What's our innovation? This may sound similar.
Alfred Spector, sorry I'm late.
This may sound similar to some things that you've heard around here. We hate monopolies. And we think that large, especially public bureaucracies, should never be left alone with things we care about, like children. And that the history of American education has actually shown pretty decisively that reforms in American education will not come from the inside. That's not to say that there aren't really good people doing innovative things, but the reforms and the transformation of the system, we believe, won't come from inside. And so 12 years ago, a group of venture capitalists and my predecessor, Kim Smith, who was at the time a student at the Stanford Business School, decided to get together and test a proposition. If venture capital and entrepreneurs can change, fundamentally change and build new industries in America, why not education? And that's been our innovation, is to bring the spirit of venture capital, of innovation, of exploration, And of data-driven decision-making, we try lots of things. Some of them work, some of them don't. And unlike lots of schools, we know when something doesn't work, we stop it. And we double down on the things that do work. So again, I think at the next level up from the real work that these guys do, we try our best to be out on the frontiers of innovation, to be looking for the next generation of education innovations that can help support the work that Geoff and Richard and their colleagues are doing, but that can also be the backbone of a new generation of schools that can radically transform outcomes.
Fantastic, thank you. So you may have seen, how many people have seen, by the way, Waiting for Superman, the movie? Excellent, okay, so you know something about this already. This grouping I'm going to entitle Waiting for Alfred Spector. Alfred just got back from Cancun, and it's not as wonderful as it sounds. He was presumably stuck in a conference room at COP16, the environmental conference.
That is correct. I left before the weekend when I could have perhaps spent 2 days on the beach.
So let me introduce Superman Spector here. So Alfred joined Google in 2007 and is responsible for research across Google and also a growing collection of special initiatives such as open source, health, university relations, and more. Actually, google.org is not down there. Google.org, our philanthropic arm. Recently, Dr. Spector has assumed executive engineering, there it is, leadership for google.org. And before Google, he was at IBM. He was a vice president of strategy and technology of IBM software business. And prior to that was VP of services and software research across IBM. Dr. Spector is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and a fellow of American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the IEEE, and the Association for Computer Machinery. So,
But do I know anything about education? Is the
well, we're
question.
about to find out. So welcome, Alfred.
Thank you very much.
So tell us about Google and education.
So I would like to do that. I would like to say it is possible to get from JFK from an international flight here by mass transit in 65 minutes.
Very good.
That includes going through customs. So it can work quite well. I think it's faster than by taxi cab. Any case, let me start. So I think it kind of goes without saying that Google, of necessity, should be highly interested in education for at least a few reasons. So first, our mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful is extremely related to education, right? That's one of the purposes that people have information, is to become educated. So that's number one. Number two, we ourselves are an organization that depends upon a highly educated workforce and understands the value of education. And that education that we all are blessed to have has led to some of the terrific breakthroughs that we've done and our beneficial impact on society. So we clearly have a very strong interest in this. And to be frank, we aspire to do more than we are presently doing, which is why we're very glad you're here on this panel and a lot of the reason this panel exists. We are, by the way, humble, and we don't exactly know what to do because this is a very complicated and industry, a very complicated part of society, and I'm sure you've commented upon that. I heard some of it as I came in, of the difficulty of affecting change within this. But that being said, there are many things that we do. And I think in a nutshell, you can characterize them probably in three ways. So first, our normal services, our normal goods and services are very impactful on education. So whether it's search, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Google Docs, those are things that are very useful and used in education. They're very cost effective in schools. Docs are free to schools. YouTube has enormous amounts of education on it, both formal and informal, do-it-yourself channels, which is a form of lifelong learning and very important, I think, to the world, are extremely popular in YouTube, and they're a growing part of that distribution mechanism. So that's one thing. The second thing is we are, because of the point that I made, very interested in the sciences and computer science in particular. So we have been very involved in education curricula design in computer science. We've been very involved in outreach to try to bring more people into that field. And we've been very involved as well in producing curricula and materials for those curricula as part of Google.com's code site within it, code.google.com. So we have a lot of materials, and they're highly used within that. The third thing, now turning more broadly to where this is going, is what should we and what are we doing with respect to education more broadly than that? And we're doing some things, and there's where I think we are needing to even do more. So for example, all of us have observed that the power of broadcast on demand is extremely powerful and would seem like it should play a very large role in education when the teacher can be brought to the student when the student wants to enrich or teach. So we have funded something called the Khan Academy. I don't know how many of you have seen that or noticed that, but if you haven't looked at it, go look at it. It's a very interesting statement, is that it's very entrepreneurial. It's the power of one individual to produce in excess of 1,000 videos, each one 5 to 10 minutes in length, covering a very large proportion of the middle and high school subject matter. And the guy's a born teacher, Salman Khan, and it's extremely low cost to produce a YouTube video, even with a simulated blackboard, which he uses. And he's doing that. His organization, with a couple of $1 million that we've given him, I believe the Gates Foundation has also given him money, is now working harder and harder. They've got 5 employees, I think, now, and they're going to continue to enhance, organize, and their site. One of the things we're doing is working with them to make available our translation capabilities, so that that material could be translated into, we do about 60 languages. So if we could actually get that material translated into 60 languages, imagine the impact we could have, not just in the English-speaking world, but around the world, particularly in developing areas where those lectures are particularly unique and valuable, probably. So that's something we're doing. We're doing some work now in open source platforms for education publishing. And we're doing 2 kinds of things. One is an enrichment activity that would be used by teachers, that they would collaborate on preparing curriculum materials, and then be able to release those materials to students in a way where the students could social network with each other. Students have always done that. I don't know about you, but when I translated Latin, I can remember talking to my best friend at the time, Scott Turner, on the phone as we tried to make sense out of Julius Caesar. That was what I did on the telephone for 40 minutes every night when I was in high school. And I'm sure people are using Facebook or other kinds of social networking activities now to do that. So that's something we could do, and of course teachers could be involved in that, either synchronously or asynchronously. The second thing, and I won't go on forever, I promise. The second thing we're doing, because I saw Craig's eyes looking at me here. The second thing that we're also doing is looking at whether in places where things can be done out of school, because the proof of success is the passing of an examination, like the AP exams, whether we could actually put those online. And if we could put AP exams, materials, and the examination preparation online so that students can do that, we could open up the ability for students everywhere to take AP exams and not just in sort of select richer school districts that have the ability to do that. And that would be very powerful. I think broadly speaking, though, just to summarize, what I feel, and I think Eric Schmidt feels this, I think we all feel it, is we're on the verge now with all of the networking, all the computation, the multimedia, the customization, machine learning that we have in the world at large, that there should be dramatic breakthrough in education. You can see it in reading tutors that are online, that are customized to children. My children did that with immense success. You can see it with online educational materials in algebra that are being used even in some public schools today. It's getting there, it's too slow. Somehow we have to find a way to accelerate it because it could have broad impact across the spectrum of students.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to grab one more mic because we need that. And then I have one more question that's the same for each of you, and then we'll sort of dive into some more specifics. But the question is, if you had a magic wand to change something about education as it happens in the US today, what would that be? Maybe we start with Ms. Mitchell.
Sure. So a natural connection. So my wand would wave over the current structuring of the progress that kids make through school, and I would make it all based on the mastery of concepts or courses, and not on seat time or quarters or semesters. What that does is it then allows teaching to become open source, both non-school-based and school-based. Because I think that in the future, pretty close to now, we're going to need to reconceptualize what we think of as the role of the teacher, given the multiple platforms by which students are learning, even if they're not being taught, and the multiple vectors that we now are able to manage to get information to kids in a just-in-time adaptive way. So think about this, for those of you who are ever in scouting, think about this as the merit badge approach to accumulating credits and you're building your transcript. So whether it's Khan Academy, AP course, you get the credit when you show mastery. And the Khan Academy's board, we're investors as well, and I serve on the board, and we're having a meeting on Monday and talking about translation, as well as what would Khan Academy look like if it were a school?
Very good.
So I think the technical answer I'd probably would focus on, in the current world, how talent is brought into public education, recruited, selected, developed, advanced, and in some cases, let out of the system. But I think the big answer right now, if I looked at least in the United States, like there's just a massive missing of public will to expect way more than what we're getting today. And I'd say, lacking a change in public will, it is very hard to expect very different outcomes. If I could wave a magic wand in today's world and say what would change that, if every parent in America, city by city, was told your child's going to go to school based on a number I give you, and you don't get to pick the school, it's a number, and it's public, it's private, it's parochial, but it's complete random placement. The will to change what we're giving kids in America would change like that overnight. But the reality is everyone opts into the world they want, and for kids growing up in the most challenged communities in America, by and large, they are left in the schools that no one else would let their kids spend one weekend, let alone, I hope I didn't offend anyone.
It's a sign of approval.
They just got their number, let alone a month. So I think the lack of will, and I believe in innovation, I believe in all sorts of technical solutions, but we've got to tackle that as a country, and there are other places that are way ahead of us right now, and you guys know that, and we will lose, if we care, we will lose by virtue of our lack of actual belief that we have to do things differently, and we care about all kids, not just the kids growing up in our apartment.
Let me just pause for a second to explain to our visitors that this is a truck elevator behind us. So that is a sound of a reversing truck, hopefully on another floor.
It is. The truck is unlikely to exit.
It is. Almost certainly won't happen. Anyway, carry on.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I thought I had discovered one of the secret things Google was working on. But it sounded really big. I was like, I don't know if this thing is going to work. Anyhow, sorry.
He didn't believe your story, Craig.
So here's what I would change if I could change one thing. I would change the incentives that structure education. Because right now, the incentives in education is that no matter how good you are, you get the same thing as the worst person in your school building. Which just makes absolutely no sense. That there is no belief that your effort is connected to an outcome. Meaning, schools are run like factories. Whether you're finished or not, 3 o'clock comes and it is done. This idea that you might have to work late, you might have to work weekends, you might actually have to finish the job is totally missing in the whole concept of education. You have a system where we have known since I graduated at the Harvard Ed School in '75 that summers are terrible for poor kids because they actually go backwards. They don't get enriched time, and we know poor kids lose effort over the summertime. There is not one school in America, I don't know one, that has taken that fact and then decided maybe we should keep our schools open in July. I just don't know any place that's done. It is the only business I know of that failure is absolutely accepted in some communities. And there is no disincentive to fail those kids, and we've been doing it for decades. So if I could change it, I would change those systems that just allow there to be no penalty for failure at all. And also no penalty really for success at all, which means that the most talented people end up going to places where they can feel good about their work, which are usually the best schools. And the people who aren't really good usually get dumped into the worst schools. And nobody cares about that. So that's what I would do.
Alfred.
Oh, there's so many things, but I guess if I were to choose one, and it's particularly related to Google, it would be a sort of broad-scale bottom-up empowerment. So what bottom-up means for the students, so students can find things, parents can find things for their children, and also teachers can find things and just do them. I think it is possible that given the difficulty of changing the system, given the 3 o'clock mentality that people are not there in summers, if we could do at Google, or the world could do with us, or separately, whichever way it works out would be fine, if we could just make it so easy that people find the enrichment that they need, and they do it after school, and the kids love it. And if they find the educational game that is a strategy game that teaches them world history, or teaches them philosophy or something, or mathematics, I think there's a possibility that this could be a very bottom-up thing, generating a kind of a bottom-up revolution.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to observe briefly that we've got a great selection of people here. Mr. Canada, who's built in a very specific geographical region a system that goes from babies all the way through adulthood. We've got KIPP, which is a school, an idea that's been replicated many, many, many times, 3 digits of times now across the country. We have Mr. Mitchell, who's figured out how to, or is in the process of figuring out how to make smart investments in education, and we've got an expert in technology. And I wanted to say thank you for being here. We're going to keep going, but I wanted to also pause to say thank you to the people who organized this. So Kristen Morrissey, Jordan Bookie, and Susie Vax, who reached out and managed to persuade these guys to come and talk to us today. So briefly, thank you to those guys. And I wanted to now dive into some of the specifics about each of the different work that you're doing. So Mr. Canada, you've done this amazing work in Harlem. That's not just the school; it's the whole community, and it's not just regular school. I'd love to hear what Baby College actually, what the curriculum is. But how do you take that and do that in other communities around the country?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we have been I think, criticized about is whether or not our model is replicable. And what people say really is, well, you did that, but it is something because of you that this all works. And I remind people, what you said about KIPP, this sort of relentless, you're going to work harder, we're going to all be, that people want to gloss over that. Right? They want to just act like I came up with some magic, and I tell people I actually didn't even think of this idea. It was somebody else's, and I took it, and I just did it, right? Because they were talking about it, and I said, well, that sounds like it makes a lot of sense to me. Why don't I just do it? Now, they could probably sue me now, right, for something. But that's this sense that, and this is what frustrates me about any of the work that's being done. Because there are a bunch of people who want to see us fail. I mean, they're actually hoping that it doesn't work. There are people saying, I know KIPP can't be doing it. And you know why? Because if they can do it, then it means the rest of the folk can do it. But it would mean they'd have to do something different, and they don't want to do that. So what they do is they hope what we're doing doesn't work. And so I tell folk I'm old enough to remember the first heart transplant, right? And there was one person who could do it in the whole world, and the patient died, right? The patient didn't even live. Now, based on how people feel about our work, no one else, no other surgeon, no other medicine person should have ever thought, maybe I should learn how to do this, right? But now, heart transplants are routine because smart people got together. Now, look, I admit, you don't want the D student operating on your heart, all right? You really hope there's some quality in that. But I would say that you also don't want the D student trying to do these kinds of efforts. You really have to get people who are talented because it's complex. The work is complex and it's connected in lots of different ways, but there's nothing magical about it and nothing so special about it that really smart people who are committed couldn't do the same thing in other communities.
Right. Excellent. So let's go to Mr. Mitchell. So I'm interested just to hear more in general about how investment works, because schools are presumably somewhat unlike regular businesses, or maybe they're not. I'm kind of interested how you go about figuring out how to invest. not all charter schools succeed. How do you figure out which ones might and which ones won't, and how do you decide to pull back?
Sure. So let me step up a level and say that over our 12 years, NewSchools has developed an investment philosophy that goes something like this, that there are the three most critical components in transforming schools and systems of schools are: one, school design, which is where charter schools come in, create the conditions under which the incentives can change, under which you can actually focus the resources on results. So school design, and an open design that allows people to make and be held accountable for decisions. Second are the people themselves. How are we creating a pipeline of the most talented people into education, and how are we able to assess them, help them grow as professionals, and at the end of some long day, if it isn't working out, exit them. So school design, people, and then the third component, which is where we've been talking already about this explosive growth, is in tools. What are the tools that these great people need to have at their disposal to be able to pull off transformative education for kids? So those are the three areas we've invested. We've invested in school designs, mostly charter schools. There are 180 schools today that enjoy NewSchools support, 85,000 kids that'll go over 100,000 next year. Our portfolio of schools that include several of Richard's schools would be the 33rd largest school district in the country today. The good news is that all of those schools, and this gets to the how do we know question, all of those schools are radically outperforming the districts in which they exist. So by 20 percentage points or greater in terms of student proficiency measures. So we're pleased with that. Now, we think we do a good job of picking winners, and we do that by an extensive process of diligence that would be familiar to any of you who've been working on that side of the business. We assess the quality of we look at team and the team risk. We look at the market and the market risk. There are some places where you just don't want to open schools. We look at the concept and the concept risk, and then we look a whole lot at the finances. So we think we do a pretty good job of picking those winners. But there have been failures, and guess what? There should be. In the business that we're in, unlike the business that these guys are in, we should be taking risks out there on a horizon that allows us to fall on our face every once in a while. And so we have withdrawn funding from schools. We've withdrawn funding from schools primarily when their ideas can't be brought to execution in a way that serves kids, and that's our bottom line. In the other two areas, in people and in tools, the metrics that go along with those, we assess the same risks, but the metrics that go along with those are internal to the operation itself. So in people, we're concerned about the throughput, we're concerned about the quality, and at the end of the day, we're concerned about the impact on student achievement of a variety of different training programs or professional development tools. So for example, we're going to launch some video-based professional development organization for teachers soon. And the question that we're going to ask is, does that have an impact, not just on how teachers feel about their lives, but on the students that they serve? So in a rough sense, that's how we go about assessing what we do. We try to be at the front end of the risk curve, and the outcomes that we care most about are student achievement outcomes.
So Alfred, one of the things I always worry about in being in a tech company is that we think technology is the answer for everything, and then we hear that in education, one of the most important things is teachers and the quality of teachers. How do we, as a Google organization, figure out when technology is appropriate, and how do we strike that balance of the sort of exploration of what might be possible versus
Right. Well, so I think we have to start with humility.
Yep.
And I think I think there are parallels with the healthcare system as well, right? So many of us think that technology would be a huge benefit in the healthcare system in terms of outcomes and reduced costs, and yet it's also a huge system with a huge amount of people in it, a huge amount of caregivers, and huge structure. And it's remarkably difficult to reform, whether you do it from inside the system or you do it from outside the system. So I think it's the same thing. Humility is really needed in looking at this, and you have to start at it. I think within Google, I think the approach that will work best for us is to find problems which we can actually solve. So rather than tackle, in some cases, the broader challenges which you folks are challenging, it's better for us to find very specific things that we can do that will be used by others and pieced together into bigger solutions. Now, maybe we can help inventory those, and maybe we can, particularly in the technology world, use our voice to explain how they fit together. In fact, Maggie Johnson and I were trying to put together a matrix, I think, just earlier in the week, trying to talk about all the kinds of technologies now that could work together and how you might use that technology structure as a curriculum for teachers. And sort of explaining for them what their future is going to be like, because it's going to be teaching and these technologies mixed together. But I think we may be able to explain it, but I think we should really try to focus on specifics where we can have broad impact. I can give you an example that's a very interesting one. It's been one that Peter Norvig and some of the machine learning people and I have been discussing. One of the advantages of computers over people is the ability to do very customized instruction. So a teacher is going to be 1 to 20, 1 to 30, 1 to 15 if you're very, very lucky. And you have to sort of balance the whole need of the class. It's very difficult to be personalized. A computer can be highly personalized in its instruction. And there are two approaches to it. One is to use the approach of educational psychologists, really understand where students have learning difficulties, what the implications of that are, what to do to rectify those difficulties. And there's been a lot of work on that. There was a very good algebra tutor done in Pittsburgh that was based on that at Carnegie Mellon University of Pittsburgh and used in the Pittsburgh schools. Another approach is to do something that a lot of us in computer science like and use heavily at Google, and that's to use machine learning. And that is when a student has trouble with something, find out, perhaps a little bit haphazardly, that a certain intervention works. And then systems, rather than having to be taught what to do in a very laborious and painstaking way, can automatically learn how to teach. And that's something that is in our core competence and something we really should be leading on, and I'm looking for ways to do more in that, for example. Anyway, I still think humility is the answer. We have only part of the solution.
Yeah. Great. And so back to KIPP. So you've now replicated your model over and over again, and you presumably learned some lessons, both sort of positive things that work and things that don't work so well. Do you have any that you can share with us? And I'm also interested in what happens next as well at KIPP, where you're heading. So,
I would say, let me start with, I think, the smart bets that were made a decade ago. When the two original guys who started KIPP, I want to emphasize, 16 years ago, they were just teaching fifth graders, right? And they had a year with a group of 48 kids where the kids went to school from 7:30 to 5, they went to school on Saturdays, and they basically said, we're going to make this commitment and help you climb the mountain to college. At the end of that year, this is down in Houston, kids were going from the 20s and 30s on the state test to the 90s. Great success. They realized a year later when they were staying in touch with the kids, they'd talk to the kids on the phone, they'd say, how's it going? You doing all your homework? And the kids would say, no. They'd say, why not? Well, because the schools don't let us take our books home because they think we'll lose them. So they realized, because it wasn't a school model, it was a promise, now we got to do 5th through 8th grade middle schools. And they opened the first 2 middle schools, one in Houston, one in the Bronx. And then for the next 5 years, they just built out those first 2 middle schools. In 2000, they meet Don and Doris Fisher, who had started the Gap companies. Don and Doris see a video of them and say, Don's a retailer. He sits down and he says, we got to grow this thing. Mike and Dave, pretty skeptical, and they said, well, what are your thoughts? He said, well, we should do 3,000 of them. And Mike and Dave said, well, we're not
like
sure.
Larry and Sergey.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
So
crazy.
Mike and Dave were like, well, we're not sure how we do the third one. So he said, well, go figure it out. And this is the first thing I think they got right. They came back at that point in 2000. They said, if you want to grow us, we'd recommend, based on everything we see, let's find great people, amazing people who are doing this in classrooms for kids. Let's create a fellowship for them to sit inside a great school like ours and then open new schools across the country. And that was a bet at a time when everyone wanted to say probably it's a curriculum that you should do, it's a school design, they're all looking for a manual. They said, no, let's find these people and replicate off human capital. And that, for the first 5 years, getting to 45 middle schools, that's what they did. Find great people, select them, train them for a year, and have them open new schools. And the results everyone came to know really were based off that model. I wish I could tell you it was something fancier. That's what it was. And core to that model was this culture of taking no shortcuts and that we're going to work hard and really be nice. Now, in terms of lessons learned, a couple big ones, pretty normal business lessons. One is we got spread really thin with single sites across the country, individual schools. So the last 5 years have been about creating regional hubs, markets where we're now creating school support centers. So there are multiple schools in a community. And our school leaders, instead of having to focus on everything, can focus on kids, teachers, and families, and not have to worry about a lot of stuff that Geoff was hinting at, politics, which are huge, raising money, finding facilities that we don't get. So a big lesson learned was there are major advantages to building regional hubs, and that the single site model spread across the country had limitations. Another lesson I think we've learned at the same time pretty much was that our kids would leave us in 8th grade pretty much on grade level, and they'd go off to competitive high schools. And they'd come back and they'd say, we're getting our butts kicked. And we're not quite ready. Or we're not set up to be as successful as they thought we'd be. And we realized that starting in 5th grade was a major limitation. And we started because that's what Mike and Dave taught. Nothing wrong with it. But we realized at that point we need to start earlier with our kids and stay longer. So not only are we regionalizing, but we're going from a middle school model to a K-12 model. And I would tell you, if you said in the future, and then I do want to put a challenge to it, but in the future, we are now recognizing we're not going to get into higher ed, but I will tell you that the lesson we're learning now, not surprisingly, if our commitment is to and through college, is that by and large, most of higher ed could give a rat's about whether our kids make it. They could care less. And this is where I talk about will. We send off kids who are the first kids in their family who have killed themselves for 8 years to get to college, and half of them in America will be gone by the end of their first year. And you know what I've discovered in the last year, because we've dug deep, and we're going to put all our data out there for all of you to read, and it ain't pretty. I was in Louisiana 3 weeks ago, and I discovered our kids go off to the state system. Most of our kids are going to go to, they're going to go into state systems, competitive college, more competitive. 5% of our kids are going to go to Harvard and Yale, everyone wants to hear about it. And they will do fine. But the majority of our kids are going to go to state college, and here's what happens. You get your check in the fall, you're gone in the spring. It is a great business. And what I found, it is like a gym on January 2nd. All week long, they are telling me, all year long, but particularly that last week, how out of shape I've gotten. And I'm right. I go in, they say, well, for $695, you get the whole year. I do it, I get a trainer, he shows me around. If everyone came back, they'd have to build 3 more gyms. No one comes back. And that is a great business, right? Like, they don't have to build the 3 more gyms if they get my cash. That is what the big higher ed system for first generation kids is working like, full stop. So if I told you what we're worried about now, 87% of our kids get 2. How many get through? And we've got to find a way to solve that through partnerships. And last thing I'd say, the next 5 years, what do I think is big beyond this to and through piece? Not to college, but through. And it connects to what you guys can really help with. We have to make this easier. And the opportunities, what's interesting about the KIPP design is you might think that we've got a school design that is super structured, and we don't. Interestingly enough, we've got a commitment to prepare our kids for success in college. Our school leaders in our regions have lots of leeway to make the decisions they think are right for their kids. And it's a very innovative design in that sense, in that there is a program, a English language arts program in one of our schools in New York that has achieved absolutely insane results that if we had told them, here's the program all KIPP middle schools need to use, would not have been created. So what we've done, which is interesting, I think, in terms of what works, and then I'll tell you the limitation, what we've done is said, we are all aligned, all 99 schools, on the mission. You walk into any KIPP middle school, any KIPP elementary school, high school, I'm telling you, you sit down with a 2nd grader, a 6th grader, a parent, a teacher, they will tell you, we're climbing the mountain of college, this is when I'm going to get there, and this is when I'm going to graduate. They will tell you that, no matter the age. We are incredibly aligned on the data definitions. So there's full transparency, no gaming. When we talk about our college matriculation rate, it's off our 8th graders. It's not off high school seniors who graduate. And it's not kids who get in but don't go. It's actually kids who get in and go. So data definitions, full control. We are really tight on human capital and leadership. So we're obsessive about who's going to run our schools. But after that, we get loose in a lot of places where traditionally districts have been really tight. We are not command and control. The greatness of that is people are innovating all the time and finding better ways. The real limitation is how do we make sure, with transparency into data, that what works moves quickly from one place to another, because things are working in places and we are not finding a way, or we haven't yet found a way, to really help people inventory, categorize, and get it shared. So I'd say there's a big opportunity if I'd say what is the system of the future? Much more likely to be very clear about the mission, very clear about data definitions, much more freedom, and bottoms-up empowerment. And we are at the we've just started with a startup partner. We're at the earliest stages. We have 2,100 teachers online. I don't know if I should say it. It looks like Facebook. Maybe I shouldn't say that. That's what it looks like. And you know, we launched this in August. 2,100 people are on, and there is video and lots of content is getting put out there and getting downloaded by teachers in the KIPP network to each other. This is very early stage, 90 days in, but we recognize it's a major limitation to our ability to scale successfully without becoming top-down command and control.
So can I pick up on that? And I know
Yeah,
I'm
two
ruining-
comments for you first, and then Alfred. Yeah, perfect.
So this is an example. One of the things we struggle with is, where does innovation come from? And one of the places, and you know, Google's famous for having the 20% that you guys are off inventing all of our futures, and we're grateful for it. But you know, Richard's got a 20% too. But Richard's 20% is based on panic. Let's just take this last point. So no command and control, absolutely right. Bottom up, absolutely right. How do you diffuse innovation? Education has always been terrible at that. And so part of where we at NewSchools find where's the spark is we find it in the very highest performers. The very best education entrepreneurs and innovators who run into a wall or a part of the wall. And this part of the wall is, how do you create a system that allows the best performers to share their work and to build on that work and nurture that work? So if I'm not embarrassing you, I mean, you guys worked hard on that for a number of years, right?
And this is just in teacher-to-teacher sharing. We went at it, I mean, this is the next plug. We went at it for 18 months on our own. One of our great staff is sitting there smiling at me, and it, you know, we made headway. We got it directionally right, and every technical piece probably wrong. Right. So what we discovered is we really, I mean, I would just say it's like, we want to be the world's best partner to product developers. We want to get really good at what does it mean to be an absolutely outstanding product development partner. Right. We are not in the product development business.
So then enter this terrific entrepreneur named Alex Grod, who himself was a fifth grade teacher. Yep. Seems to be the nurturing spot for all great minds in education. And Alex has this idea and comes to us at NewSchools with this idea of creating this lesson sharing platform for teachers across the country. And internationally, there's nothing stopping it at the border. And so with seed funding from us, with the first big customer in KIPP, this organization called Better Lesson, take a look at it, Better Lesson is up and flying. And it really does have pretty unlimited potential, we think, to address at least a part of this need for a bottom-up innovation engine that will allow the very best practices to circulate and to grow. So
it's a perfect example. Let me just do one little, just how amazing, how very little moves quickly. In your world moves so quickly, it blows me away. Our world, it's a slower moving world. So just, if you want to work with us, just be ready. You know, it isn't like we flip a switch.
But I remember, by the way, in the movie, you talking about solving all these problems by 1977. It was 1975.
Jeffrey, so he more scars to show for it. But I would say this: we launched this thing at our annual summit. 2,800 people come together. We're in Vegas. I announced we're going to launch this thing in front of 2,000 teachers. 10 days ago, they did a survey out to 2,000 teachers who are already online now. Do you have suggestions for how to improve this site? They got 399 teachers to respond. That never happens in our world, ever. I mean, ever happens. A lot of work for Better Lesson to come. But, I mean, I was just blown away when I heard that 399 took time. These are busy people who are stressed and swamped, teaching every day. They said, I want this to work, and I'm going to take enough time to tell you what you're going to have to do to improve it, to make it actually save myself time or make it easier for me to access good stuff. So just an early indication, like, you can make a huge contribution here, and we need as many people as possible helping us.
So I wanted to comment on this. So I don't do education full-time, but this is now the fourth or fifth instance of teacher sharing platforms that I've heard about. We have one that we've done through Guru within Google. There's another that we've done from google.org that's being used in Rwanda with USAID that has been supporting it as well. So that's interesting. I heard that the state of New York has one for public school teachers within the state. I heard that from the local public school that my children go to, from from the administrator there, and then I've heard about this one.
Yep.
So I think this is something whose time is coming quickly, and I think in the bottom-up notion we've all been talking about sounds very powerful. Second thing I wanted to just mention, again, as we think about this internationally as well, we in the Google Charitable Giving Committee made a donation to an Indian school, and I think it was an inner-city school for extremely poor children. I think we gave them approximately, a rough number is $100,000. It was interesting that 1/4 of that was to buy books. So that was a very large sum of money. So again, as we think about, the very simplistic things that one might do to improve education is to reduce the costs of certain things whose costs can clearly be reduced. We are on the verge of book readers of remarkable, I think, resilience and extremely low cost. And I have a feeling the algebra book that I used in high school, or one that was used even by my parents, was very close to being good enough even if it were out of copyright. Now, whether the state boards will approve it, because whether it's met with some most recent view of how to teach algebra, I rather doubt, but I learned from it, and my parents did. They did pretty well. All right, and the third thing I did want to mention, and we do care about this as well, and it's something that's been on my mind since graduating from college. Higher education's costs has been growing above the inflation rate now for, you guys probably know, 30 years for I've ever...
2% above inflation for the last 30 years.
Right, for 30 years, 2% above the inflation rate. Now, one can perhaps understand why that's true in the healthcare system, right? Because the healthcare system, there are all these new treatments and more technology, and we have been getting a longer lifespan and their benefits. But frankly, in education, it's not clear why this should be so. In fact, there's every reason to think there should have been economies of scale and improvements in such things. So I think what we're saying can have a very profound impact. I've always thought about, I was a professor for a decade, I spent an enormous amount of time generating introductory data structures courses that were probably about the same introductory data structures courses that Craig might have been teaching at one point in his life. And so there's huge efficiency opportunities for us with lesson sharing, and it's not just in the K through 12, but in the universities as well. And that's something, frankly, we need to have because we need more students in the universities, and we probably don't want to pay for it. We want it to be done more efficiently.
Yeah. So I wanted to go to Google Moderator. Can we have that up on the screen? So just by way of explanation, at Google, we rather than having people ask questions necessarily straight off from the floor, we get people to think about questions in advance, and then others can vote on those questions and say, I want to ask that question as well. So it's kind of this crowdsourcing democratic approach. So the most popular question was from a former teacher in Mountain View saying, KIPP and other similar schools rely on a large amount of work from teachers. These schools perhaps correspondingly have a majority of young teachers with less than 5 years of experience. Do you see this as a problem, and is this model sustainable?
I guess that's for me.
That, I guess, yeah, it says KIPP right up there. You can't dodge this one.
So, so let me say this. I think we have gotten a lot better. So two things. We've got to remember, KIPP was started by two 20-somethings. The school leader profile that we've gone after and we recruited were people who were successful teachers themselves, not yet school leaders, who we said, we're going to help you in a year's time go from being a great teacher of 30 kids to being able to build a school that serves 12 or 13 times that many children. That was the profile and has been the profile of our school leaders. It's not a surprise then that the teaching staff we attracted was young. So I just want to I have no misgivings about how this thing got going and the nature of all the amazing people I get to work with who got it to this point. Second thing, we are getting older, and it's the nature of life. I hope we don't lose some of what there might be a concern about, which is now when people want to be a school leader at KIPP, we used to have people who you could have 2 years of teaching experience and maybe make the cut. Now people look at this, well, if they haven't taught for 5 years, all of a sudden, are we becoming that which we once we're trying to disrupt? So we are getting older, and our average teacher now, we're over, they're not 26 or 27 anymore. We're now looking at folks in their 30s on average. Last thing I would just say is we have, and I don't know if this is baked into the question, I mean, the profile of people we had who created our schools and built our schools, 99 of them now, are people who would go through walls for kids. We call that prove the possible. That's the bullseye, And they have to have people who've delivered results. We didn't attract people who had lots of management training. And so we've learned through our leadership training that driving results and wanting to just do whatever it would take is core. We can't, we're not giving up at all. But our training of leaders has really had to build out managing others. What you probably, I don't know what your rubric here is at Google, but for us it's managing others. And we're seeing the results. Our teacher retention has improved by 7 points system-wide over the last 3 years. I would not argue that the economy probably has something to do with that. But I'd also say we're getting our teacher satisfaction levels are growing. And we measure this every school, every year. And there's lots now of sharing of best practices. Why are teachers thriving in one place and not at another? And the bottom line is that's a management issue, and we're improving in that to do it. And I think if we keep improving that, I'm not worried about it from a sustainability standpoint.
Great. So what do you foresee, and maybe we'll ask Jeffrey Canada to talk to this, what do you foresee happening in our education system as the socioeconomic gap continues to widen, and how can we begin to reverse or overcome the repercussions?
Well, I mean, this is something that I really worry about a lot. And to me, technology is both an answer and a concern. And it's an answer because the complexity of education has stymied lots of folk, right? It's just a complex thing. When you find folk who can do it, it's wonderful, but all of us know, I'd give 3 or 4 fingers for 8 more good teachers, right? I mean, I just would. It's just so hard to find these great folk who can really deliver and do what we're talking about. It's not just the intensity, it's the stamina, it's the ability to do this day in and day out and to take it seriously. So as we all recognize that the blue-collar manufacturing jobs, which 3/4 of the kids that I'm working with, everybody would have assumed when I was a kid that's where they were going, right? They would just say, okay, you kids from the South Bronx and from Bedford, we know you're going to get jobs. You're not going to go to college, but you got these jobs out there, you can have a good life. That's all gone. That's never coming back again. So now the bar has been placed up really high, and I've got kids who are still not where they need to be even to get the blue-collar jobs, right? So you've got this big mismatch, which is, I think, what we're dealing with. The reason technology could help is that I really fundamentally believe that school teaching and education is going to be drastically different, right, in 5 or 6 years. I mean, I don't see any way that that's not going to happen. And you all won't get this because you all are much too young, but I was trying to explain to my granddaughter what it meant to have to go to the library to get information, right? I mean, I was saying when I was in college, you had to get out of bed, you had to go downstairs, you had to walk across you had to go and see if the book was there, the book wasn't there, you had to go back home, the book was checked out, there's nothing you could do, you were like, I'll come back. She was looking at me like, that's not for real. It just seemed crazy to her, and it just made me realize how we're never going back there, right? Knowledge is at your fingertips, and that's not going to change. We may have not figured out how to make it consumable for everybody at the rate, but I think that can be worked out by really, really smart people like you all, sort of focusing on it. But here's the problem. There's a whole bunch of folk who realize the money in this business is getting my kids to play games. And they've made those games so addictive, so fascinating, right, that my kids are all going to be the end users of the stuff that's not going to make them any smarter, right? Where other kids, they're going to play games too, but they are absolutely going to learn how to use this technology to get a foot up. And so if we can't figure out how to fix this, we're actually going to create a larger problem moving forward, because kids who got it together are going to get even better, right? Because they're going to understand this, they're going to have all this extra information, and the kids who are struggling are really going to get trapped by the profit motive, right? When I was asking people, these games are so great, why can't there be some knowledge in these games? Why can't you put something of value in this stuff that kids would just and because it doesn't make any money that anyone's thought about, and and the people who are driving this are really thinking about and the money is huge. And so if I can't get some folk who are really good and savvy thinking on that level of competition, that's really who's competing for my kids' brains, I think that we've got a problem. So I do believe that this gap could get worse for kids. And technology could make it worse if we don't get folk in technology to understand that they've got to help us bridge this gap, because other folk realize I got a whole group of kids waiting for the next hot game to come out. They're going to spend all their money and they're going to spend all their time invested in that. And that's not going to help my kids.
It sounds like a great challenge thrown out to the Google community for sure. So let's go to Kristen's like boring holes and me from over there. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So thanks for coming, first off, and thanks for doing great things in the education space. My question is a really simple question that doesn't have a simple answer, but I'm wondering what you guys think about it. So if you look at the OECD PISA reports, it shows that we're 25th and 26th, depending on which reports you're looking at, in the world behind all these countries, right? And you look at places like Finland and Korea and Canada, and they're all like totally eating our lunch. Why are we not learning from their systems? You know, people say, oh, we have the teacher union, but they all have thriving teacher unions. Why are we not working from their system? And if we are, do you guys know how we are and why it's not working here?
Well, I mean, you're right. You asked a very complex question. I'm going to not try and answer it in its entirety. I'm going to just try and answer the areas that I've been really concerned about and working on. One is that we have a belief in this country that certain conditions have prevented certain kids from learning, right? And so you just describe that away. So yeah, well, you know, those kids live over there and you've got all these problems, you got gangs and stuff like that. And if you therefore don't feel like you have to solve it, right, because you understand why it exists, then you never change that. So that's the first thing that I think is a problem. The second issue that I think is a problem is that we have, as a country, always been able to import the talent we've needed, right, to be successful. And so even in our schools that are decent schools, there was never a pressure to compete internationally. So we could set a standard that we felt comfortable about and just assume, well, if we need certain people, we'll just get them from countries who are producing them. I think that game is over. And the game is over, but the educators are still acting as if that's still okay. So this sense of crisis is not apparent to anyone who hasn't looked outside of their school, right? And so, meaning that if you look at what's happening in the country, you can get panicked like, oh my God, but no one's doing that, right? Everybody just feels like it's going to be okay, right? It's just going to, it's going to be okay because in my community it doesn't seem that bad. And that's why I think a number of us have been yelling loudly that this thing is a crisis. We're not going to be okay. We need to tackle this. It is much larger than just the teachers' unions, right? In our good schools, they are not doing enough. The most interesting report, I think, came out from McKinsey that looked at the teachers in those countries, right? They're all the top third. The teachers in the US are all the bottom third. Well, that gets to a whole issue. I mean, if this is a profession that takes talent and everything, then you've got to drive talent into this profession. And I think that that's been one of the limiting factors. And so I think as a nation, we have to wake up about this issue and push around a bunch of things that make folk uncomfortable, right? In terms of, I think, the changes that have to happen. So that's part of the answer that I would say.
I think that's exactly right. And I think that, you know, just a note back to Geoff's point about the digital divide. I think the real digital divide is not about access to machines anymore. It's about actually being able to build the infrastructure of those machines and understand how those machines work and the systems that are involved with them. And so if you take the PISA reports and you actually try to disaggregate by ethnicity and by income, I mean, you find the third world alive and well in STEM education in every urban community in America. So it's a big, big problem, and you're right about it. So I think the other thing that I would say, in addition to what Geoff said, is that we have always been trapped by our fascination with local control and not a radical decentralization and transparency, but this idea that somehow local communities will define what's good. And so one of the things that is important to understand about those other examples is very high nationally benchmarked standards whereby people can start to make comparisons. And so the question of quality is not just about what it feels like in my kid's school, but it's about how my kid's school compares to a lot of other schools. So I think that we're making some headway with the Common Core and new assessments and new assessment technology that will be associated with that. But to Richard's earlier point about we got to get the data and the information in the hands of people who can get angry enough about it to start to make some of the change. And that value chain is a complex one, as you pointed out.
Two really quick things. One is, I love that data, and I love that because people are just fat and happy. I mean, that's part of this whole picture, right? I mean, we got a will issue on urban education. The reality is, I mean, I can't tell how many times people talk, well, our schools are good, the suburban schools. They're not. A lot of them just stink. And it's embarrassing, and like we all think we're great, and like and people don't want to do the hard work. So I'm gonna say people want shortcuts. You get what effort you put in, and other people fundamentally, kids and adults are working harder. Like that is it. Like our kids are not working harder. Right. They're being outworked. Second thing I'd say that and it goes to this issue, and I'll just say, like I think everyone at KIPP would tell you if we could, we are so supportive of national standards, higher, clearer, simpler. There's a big resistance out there. I'll tell you, we're going to get into it on ESEA reauthorization if you want to get it. I sat in the most influential, what will be the most influential congressperson's office, who said I can get on board with a lot of things. I can't get on board with the national standards. And I said, well, let me show you the KIPP report card. True story. I said, I just want to show you. Our kids in New Orleans are the highest performing kids. We've got 7 schools, about to open our 9th. Highest performing kids in New Orleans, growing academically at a faster rate than any kids. Only because we at KIPP make our kids take a national test requirement. Do you know that our kids in New Orleans are among the lowest performing kids in KIPP? They are celebrated in their community. I don't want to take any of the credit. They're working so hard. Yep. They are not remotely competitive to our kids in New York. Yep. So you look at this and like this, talk about like this issue. We've got, you know, if you could say get will around something, this is going to be a battle, and people need to insist on it, because we will not be able to compete if people don't insist on a common expectation, no matter where you're born in America. Will not happen.
Go in a classroom and say, now, would this really work in this classroom with this teacher? So that would, I think, help when talking with folks in the business like us, really sort of tease some ideas out quicker than other ideas. So that would be my thought.
I don't know if I can top that. I would say this. I mean, if you looked at the number of just top quality engineers working on this issue in K-12, it would probably be astoundingly depressing to you. I mean, it's just, you know, my kids do stuff after school. It's the same software that is touted as the best software in the most innovative schools. And it is, I mean, it's, you know, it keeps their attention for a little bit. And again, they'll get on games that do other things, and they will be going at it forever. So I think the number one thing you do is like just to know we desperately need more and more talent in K-12 across all fronts: advocacy, politics, teaching, leadership, and on the technology front, we do not have the number of folks with programming, you know, skills and excellence helping solve this issue. And then the one thing I'll add to Geoff's, we have 6 schools here in New York. If you want to come and say hello and get a sense for what it's like, we'd love to have you come visit. And then what I will promise you is that we will have people sitting probably and firing questions at you to think about some of the things we're struggling with that you might be able to tackle or have ideas with, you know, right away. So I just, invitation out there. We need so many talented people, and boy, is there a dearth of people with your skills involved in the issue. Like it's a major challenge that you can help solve.
So it's 3 for 3. So we desperately need, and I think I would order it, you know, go visit a school. If you've been a teacher before, or TFA before, or doing citizen schools, you probably have at least the beginning of an idea of where some of the bottlenecks are. But I think that we're, if I can step back and then forward, we really are at a moment where we have extracted all of the value we can get out of Education 1.0. And that's by, going from baby college through college. It's by the absolute relentlessness of KIPP about the details of how to make a school work. But we got to get from 1.0 to 2.0. And we need you to go in and look at what 1.0 looks like and use the same analytic, critical skills that you bring to work here every day. Identify those bottlenecks, identify the shape of 2.0, and help us build it. So take some of that creative energy that you have and help us identify those key innovations that are going to help change the human capital equation, change the school design and equation, put better tools in the hands of both teachers and kids. So that's the individual side. On the corporate side, I think that we as a group of education reformers need Google to stand foursquare for innovation and for the continued safety of innovation in the education space. Because while it's a terrible market to sell in for a couple of reasons, but one of the biggest is that the sales cycle is dominated by some of the least innovative publishing companies in the world. And,
Yes.
and
Yes.
as a corporation, Google can make and continue to make safe space for education innovations by helping to invest in things like Khan Academy, but also by using the tools that you have in a way that keeps those folks out from the clamoring jaws of.
And can I ask
So,
you a kudos thing you've done already? You made this point, but like from a disruptive standpoint, Google Docs, Google Earth. I mean,
right.
The fact that these things don't cost our schools money, right? Like, we couldn't keep up with how they're used inside schools. I mean, Google Earth. I mean, you guys. I don't know what the analytics tell you, but they are used every day by our teachers. So you have found ways to already add value, and it's just a matter of doing more. But I hope you feel good because the price has been right for educators in America.
So let me make a comment on this, since the question was asked, what can we do? Many of you listening may know, Google.org is technology-led philanthropy. So we are looking for places in Google.org where we can use our talents within Google. We can build off of our core capacity, whether it's our processing infrastructure, our networking, our ability to reach people, or even our brand. And we can combine those and do things for a few engineers, what might take tens or hundreds or maybe even more elsewhere. We launched Google Earth Engine today, actually it was yesterday, I guess, at COP16, which provides a global monitoring environment that will be very useful, I think, in reducing deforestation. It builds off a huge long-term investment in Google Earth. If we can do similar things in education, I am very interested in that. You can send me mail. We want to start new projects, but we don't exactly know what the best projects are to start, as I said when I sat down. But we are interested in doing things, and I am open to ideas. We even have a mechanism to go through them now and look at them sort of carefully, and a thought that we can do small projects where there's sort of little things to see if they're worthwhile and then invest significantly more.
Just to streamline everything, sorry. I wanted to make sure everybody knows on VC and in this room, we have two Go links up here, Go Education, which is the education site, and Go Help Education. If you're interested in going to KIPP schools or going to the Harlem Children's Zone, or want to get involved in your local community, or want to get involved in building an engineering product, please go to Go Help Education so that we're streamlining communication. This list will be reviewed by the education team.org and community affairs so that we can put you in the right place. So feel free to go to that link and put in your information, and we'll contact you with volunteering opportunities, and we'll help these guys' inboxes. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Susie. So Bob, question from you.
Yeah, I guess first just comment, what should Google do? I'd say, well, if anybody's read Neil Stephenson, what we ought to do is we should build a runcible, otherwise known as the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer. Stephenson's a science fiction writer, and he writes about this device, the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer, which is this book, essentially, that knows what this young girl needs to know, and it knows how to teach her, always as she goes on through life. It starts off teaching her basically cute stories about animals and things, and later on teaches her essentially how to take over a country. But the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer, I think from a technologist point of view, that would be the absolute, because it's the thing that knows what you need to know, and it needs to know how to teach you.
And the book is The Diamond Age, right?
Yeah,
so it's the main title
right,
of the book. So
right.
if you're looking for the book.
Yeah, it's Diamond Age. It's the Runcible or the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer. But that's sort of one extreme, which is the ultimate in personalized teaching. It's got a lot of creativity in it. It uses machine learning, all the other stuff, the stuff that we know how to do here and the stuff that we do with ads every day. There's this other end of, and I think we can see from local examples even, things like School of One, who go off and produce essentially, new customized programs on a per child basis per day, okay, figuring out exactly how we're going to teach this kid today. They claim great results from that, okay. On the other hand, we have this, it sort of makes it hard to think about these problems, because on the other side we have sort of the opposite, which delivers good results too. One of the best examples is the Department of Defense school system, which is very much focused on consistency. Their problem is that since military people are being shifted around constantly. They need to be sure that when they tell a family, you know, by the way, you're moving from Guantanamo Bay to Okinawa, the kid, who may be one of the 30 or 40 kids in the Guantanamo Bay High School, has to know that he can pick up, move to Okinawa, and go into class, and he's going to be taught the same quality, the same stuff. He's going to be at the same place in the curriculum and the rest. Now, it turns out the Department of Defense schools, who are dealing with this mobility issue and have all sorts of systems set up so that they can move kids around and be very consistent with the system in the teaching, they turn out to be, if you treated them as a state, one of the best states in the country, although they're rarely recognized for it. So we have this group that is very focused on standards, very focused on consistency and the rest, who turns out to be one of our best educational systems, okay? On the other hand, we've got this gut feel that this blind faith in technology, that personalization is probably the best way to go. And I'm wondering, I think the personalization probably inevitably is the correct way, but in the real world, where we maybe don't have the technologies yet or the funding or whatever, can you talk about how do we deal with this tension between these two approaches? And the excellent example of the DoD schools, which are dead consistent.
So I'll take a try, which is a little bit of a riff off my last answer, is that I think the DoD schools are a great example of extracting the maximum value of Education 1.0, is that they are in the same way that KIPP schools are, in the same way Geoff is. They are rigorous about the details. They are very focused on kids. They're actually rather personalized in terms of their attention to individual children, even if the technology is not personalizing the delivery of the knowledge. So I would put them in this example of they're at the wall in terms of what they can deliver for kids. There's more they could deliver for kids, but we need to break through that wall and get to 2.0 and experiment with 2.0 to get there. So School of One, and we're hold the board seat and invest in School of One, and I think they were here talking to some of you as well, and so Geoff, one of the things that Joel is looking for next is some other pilot sites, and one of the things that I think he is thinking about is whether there are some DoD schools that would be interesting places to play that out. So I think that there's a transition that can and ought to be made, but we shouldn't be lulled into a false sense of security by our ability to maximize on 1.0, because going back to the PISA question, maximizing on 1.0 is still a failure for especially poor kids of color, but I think for us as a nation.
And I would just say that I think a lot of us struggle. It is very hard for us to do the really personalization piece, because if you've got 22 kids in a school and a teacher, everybody knows that you should really be teaching to each kid, but how do you actually do that is really hard, and very few people do it well. I think mostly we've tried to figure out how to standardize what we do in a way that at least we can understand it and measure it and maybe figure out how to replicate it. But there are so many things that we haven't ever even looked at, such as all of us in meetings, maybe it never happens at Google, but in meetings I find myself drifting off, right? People are talking and I'm thinking of something. Well, kids do that all the time, right? And there are kids who actually, but I have never seen them do that when they're playing video games. Now, what is it that's happening to those brains then that's not happening at these other? And if we could just figure that out, right, and package it, it would be huge. Because so many of my kids, it's just not only, and sometimes they've learned to look at you like they're paying attention, and they're still, wishing they were texting their friend because their thing is vibrating in their pocket, whatever it is. And as educators, we're at a loss, right? Because you'd have to be like some kind of psychiatrist to figure out he's really paying attention or not once the kids realize that you're going to make them look at you. So part of this, an issue of, it seems like people have solved some of this in other places, and my question is, well, why can't we transfer that to education? Why can't I have my kids would you quit studying algebra, please, and go to bed, right? Instead of me telling them to turn off the video game and go to bed, right? We haven't figured that, but I believe there are constructs in us as human beings that are open to that kind of learning. And this is the 2.0 piece. We just haven't figured out how to tap into that for the variety of kids that we have, which is why I think this is so exciting right now.
Great, thanks. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. We'll see if we
I'll
want to
make
hear.
it quick. I have a quick anecdote and then a question to follow up. So the quick anecdote is I went to a lot of different public school districts in Russia and Germany, in New York, then Los Angeles, then New Jersey, and then I went to Rutgers University in New Jersey. And I noticed a huge difference. I don't know any test that can measure this on a kind of national level. There's a huge difference between people that are, say, interested in chemistry and studying chemistry because they want to be masters at chemistry, they want to understand what's going on, and the people who want to get an A in chemistry. And similarly, after I graduated 2 years ago, I've been in industry. Huge difference between maybe computer science graduates from some of the top universities in the country who aren't really interested in technology, and they end up going, in my experience, to the financial sector here. And the people who maybe didn't finish college or even finish a CS degree, but who, if you give them a paper, they'll read it, and they'll have very intelligent commentary on it. It seems as if you just measure grades and if you just look at performance, you completely miss that differentiation. Is that important?
Wow. I mean, that's really profound, and education has just passed on that, right? I mean, we just haven't really thought deeply about any of these kinds of issues, and we've just decided there's going to be basically an artificial standard around some things, and people who can get there, terrific, and people who can't, we don't care how really smart you are, right? Which is really what we're talking about. Really, how smart is this person? And that is totally glossed over. You could be brilliant, you get a D, that's it, right? It defines who we are as people, and that's really not who people are, and we haven't figured out a way of getting at this other thing. And by the way, I just happen to think because the people who are really good at the one kind of control all of the grading and the testing, right? That they honestly aren't letting anybody else through, right? And that's their job, is to really block, regardless of how intelligent, is to block folk who can't perform in the way they want them to perform. And I think if you're really trying to get people ready for skills for the world that they can get, that we've got to open this up a little bit in a way that's reasonable. But I think that's 3.0. I think we've got a ways before we're going to get there on that issue.
And I would just to be an optimist on this, I would say, not in defense, but when I started this 20 years ago, no one was even talking about 1.0, to be fair. Like kids of color, no one knew how bad it was. There was no assessment going on whatsoever. Kids of color in suburban districts who certainly were doing fine, but they're not doing fine really. So there's an iterative nature to this, and the quality of assessments and what we're about. I mean, at KIPP right now, just to give you like how real it is, we're trying to figure out how do you measure the things we think are just as important when it comes to character as academics. So there's reading and math, but there's also things like grit and the ability to persist and fight through challenges. And how powerful is it to be sitting down with a parent? We're doing this right now and testing it, and it's beyond beta, to say to Geoff, like, here's how your kid's doing in math reading. Here's how your kid's handling setbacks. And let's talk about how your child handles setbacks, because if they don't grow in that area, this is really going to hold them back in life. That's a pretty radical report card to get. We don't really do much of that. But so I think this stuff is iterative, but if we didn't have the beginnings, I don't even know that people would be thinking about we're missing it, because they don't even know that we're missing anything. So I'm more optimistic, and hopefully, honestly, people in this room will be helping solve that issue.
And I would only add that I think that there is rather than simply defining people in those categories, which I know you weren't doing, I think that one of the things we have to focus on is helping people migrate from small, narrow technical mastery to actually being able to be playful about the fields and the concepts that they're interested in. And that has to come through not only the evaluation, but the work itself. And I think one of the things that really has happened in the last few years is that we've begun to accept what was always set as a floor, mastery in English and English language arts and mathematics, as a ceiling for achievement. And that we got to crack that one on our way from 1.0 to 2.0. Thanks.
So I lied. We didn't have time for 2 whole questions. But I would like to just end with giving each of you an opportunity just to leave us with a closing thought. Aim for 60 seconds, and we'd love to hear kind of the thing you'd like us to leave the room thinking about. So, Geoff from Canada.
Yeah, and I just want to remind, I think, everybody that even though we've talked about lots of problems, this is still, I think, the most exciting time in education since I've been in the field, which has been like forever. There are lots of changes, right, on the horizon. And for those of us who once thought we would never, because there was a point in my life where I said, well, I'm going to save a few kids, but we're never going to get to this big issue writ large about these poor kids in all these other places. I mean, we are right there right now. And I think the next 3 or 4 years could be absolutely transformative in education. Education right now, when I was in 1967, they brought a computer into my high school. They had to bring a Mack truck to bring it in, right? It was this huge thing, and we learned Fortran. You all don't know anything about that. And you had to punch all of these cards, and they'd got it. And I decided right then and there was no future in this technology thing at all, right? Because it took too long. But education, so now you know all of what you've done in technology and how crazy that sounds. Education is still this huge, gigantic thing. It has not changed. It is so ripe for revolution, right? And I think we finally got some folk who are both on the practice side and the theory side who are all saying at the same time, this is too important not to do, so let's get it right.
Thank you.
Join us. Just get in it. And we need all the help we can get. And thank you for coming today.
When John Doerr started NewSchools Venture Fund 12 years ago, he and the founding group made a bet that entrepreneurs could change education in the same way that they changed virtually every other industry in America. That's where I started with you today, and that's where I'm going to end up. I think for all the reasons that we've talked about, the time is right now for us to be able to take that incredible lever and put it into against this rock of education and make a real difference for kids. And I hope that we can continue to start with the kids who've been left behind the longest because we owe it to them.
Yeah,
I think the time is right also. I think technology broadly will make a big difference, and I think Google will as well. So send your cards and letters.
yeah.
Well, thank you, all of you, so much for spending the time with us. It's been absolutely fascinating. I've learned a huge amount, and I appreciate your time.